Friends, welcome to this edition of our Northwest Synod podcast. And today my guest is Michael Harvey. Michael is working with us over a 3-year period to develop a culture of invitation in our Synod churches. And today we're going to be talking about the power of how are you? Michael, welcome. Tell me something about the significance of that title, the power of how are you?
I think we're in a society, Lawrence, where the how are you, when we ask people that question, is always answered with the word fine. However, when people really realize that you mean it, very often I've found is that people suddenly open up. They open up a story about themselves. Sometimes that story has got pain and hurt and worry and anxiety about it. It might be something that's happening to themselves. It might be something happening in their family or in their community. But the power of how are you is that it can surprise us in what comes from the other person, something that we didn't know before we actually asked the question. So it's a surprisingly powerful question.
Yes, and I want, before we dig deeper into that, let's just go back to the difference between the genuine how are you, which is asking about people and saying, I'm here for you, I'm interested in you, I care for you, I want to be of help. What is happening? That and contrast that with the conventional I'm fine, and how destructive that can be.
Yeah, I think when we genuinely mean how are you to someone, I think we are somehow hearing an echo from the very first question in Genesis, which is, of course, where are you? And that was a kind of a question of disconnection. It was God in the garden asking the first human beings, where are you? Because God wanted to walk with them. He wanted to be connected with them. And I think when it's genuinely asked, it is an echo to that early question, which echoes down the generation. However, we are in a society where we have this learnt response. The learnt response when somebody asks you the question, how are you, is fine. And if you're quick, you ask, how are you, back to the other person. So it's like a double protection against really kind of saying what is actually going on in one's life. And so we all protect ourselves in that way because we've learned that people don't really want to know how we are, because if they really knew, that they would be shocked, with what is going on. However, it is much needed in a kind of a society that's got a high amount of people with anxiety, a high amount of people with depression.
Yes.
How are you is vital.
Yes. I'm becoming more and more convinced that when we, as it were, enter into the conspiracy of, fine, how are you? It's not that we are hard-hearted and disinterested in the other person, but that actually somewhere deep down there is a real fear and a terror about the depth of what's happening, that we don't dare go near the answers. And I think that is reaching epidemic proportions in our society at the moment. And as you say, it is so vital. And actually, when when heard genuinely, as you say, there's that incredible surprise at the answers that come out.
Yeah, so interesting you use the word fear and surprise, because I think that's right. I think there's a kind of, I would say theologically, there's a boundary edge of the kingdom of God that suddenly emerges with a "how are you?" bizarre as that might kind of sound. But, fear is the thing which keeps us from actually genuinely engaging there, on both sides, by the way.
Yes.
Because sometimes we're afraid to ask, "How are you?" And some people are afraid to kind of give us an answer. But when there is a genuine encounter between two human beings, and I believe God at that point, there's this kind of surprise, almost like a joyous surprise, that even in the telling of the story, there is a kind of, a surprise waiting for us, a gift waiting for both parties in it. It's almost as if both parties go away blessed in some way.
Yes. And it's interesting too, isn't it, that because we don't, as a matter of daily practice, engage with each other in that way, we provide for that sort of answer to the question, "How are you?" with therapists and people that we pay genuinely to listen to us and to give us space to talk about the things that we can't talk about to anyone else.
Yeah. And where can you go in society now to have a genuine conversation with someone? Yes, we have to pay therapists to have a genuine conversation. But again, if you look at Jesus as our model here, you only have to kind of look, at his one-on-one interactions with people, where Jesus is genuinely asking questions of them, which is ridiculous. Jesus is God and asking a human being a question. And yet he does it time and time and time again in his one-on-one interactions. And the encounters often lead to a change, kind of in the person that he's having an encounter with. And for us in our generation, the fact that a question like "How are you?" could actually kind of have this incredible holy impact on somebody's life is something for us to consider.
In your experience, what are some of the sorts of things that emerge when people ask, "How are you really?" and get the answer about how things really are?
Yeah. It's a story often. It's a story emerges, and every person has a unique story. I always say to kind of youngsters when I go into the schools, get your thumb out for me. Please have a look at your thumbprint for me. I want you to know that there are 8 billion people on this planet, and only you have that thumbprint. That's ridiculous, isn't it? It's absolutely ridiculous. 8 billion people. And yet you and everybody else has a unique thumbprint. And that means that you can make a print, your own unique print on this world, which means that everybody has a unique story. There's some pain that often comes out in the story. And don't we see it in our Bible stories as well? Here's Moses minding his own business. In fact, he was minding the sheep, minding his father-in-law's sheep, and God comes to him, and basically Moses takes a closer look at the bush burning, and then we have this conversation that happens between God and Moses. And what comes out of that conversation is God is taking him back to a place of pain. My goodness, 40 years previously, he was in Egypt. He's run away from Egypt. But God appears to want to actually redeem that in some way, wants to use, something that was painful because it had real meaning. It was something to do with your story as to who you were and who you could be, that actually kind of, when we get people to tell their story, it pours out of them because it's their story and they've remembered it in a particular way. And often it just needs somebody to listen, somebody to almost kind of birth something new from the story. Not by, kind of telling them what to do. Not at all. It's just by Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's something, of incarnational proportions, which means, God is in the midst of the conversation that happens.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that because reflecting on my own experience of Acorn, so often the names I get are not people from outside of the church, but inside of the church. And actually, I would have said at least 7 times out of 10, they turn out to be some pretty acute pastoral situations. And it wouldn't be appropriate to give examples because they're not my stories, but we have a conversation. Actually, I'm not sure how much input I ever have to give, but at the end of the conversation, just the listening and the telling of the story itself does something to change the situation. And it has begun to feel to me as though it's what the question does is to open up for people an opportunity to tell the ways in which they feel they're being crucified at the moment, and that there is something new that's born out of that telling of the story. I guess I'm saying it feels like it's Easter shaped. It's crucifixion. And some form of resurrection. Do you think that's over egging the pudding?
Not at all. I honestly kind of think we are reliving, retelling, re-experiencing the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus as we answer the call of God to actually ask, how are you? Why would I think that? Why are you intimating that? I go to the kind of the morning of Easter morning. The women who were going to anoint the body of Jesus, and they were worrying, as they were going, thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to roll the stone away? How are we going to roll the stone away? Oh my goodness, we want to anoint the body, but how are we going to roll the stone away? Do you know, the stone was rolled away. The stone was rolled away. And what I've discovered in the how are you, at times, if the other person truly responds to the genuineness of that question, it's almost as if the stone is rolling away. And what is been entombed, the tomb becomes a womb. It becomes the birth of something new. And again, why would I say that? I'd say that because very often at the end of the conversation, a person would say, thank you for helping me get that off my chest.
Yes.
And that sounds like healing to me. Even if we are, it's a form of words. But what if it's true? What if it's actually true? What if we find that there is something in the encounter with another human being, with God in the midst of that that there's a form of healing going on. Or they might not just say, oh, thank you for helping me get that chest. They might say, oh, thank you. I'm feeling that much better
Yes.
now for being able to share it with you. So something's entombed. How are you? The power of how are you releases something, and that which we think is dead births something new. So, could we think that how are you leads from tomb to womb? That there's new birth emerging.
Yeah. Which would not be surprising if God were involved.
Shock horror.
Shock horror. How do we equip people to be the ones who go around asking others, how are you? How are you really?
Well, as we've discussed in Acorn, this practice is simple to do, and frankly, simple not to do. It's a very low barrier to entry. It's a very low barrier to entry. It really is praying the 14 words every day, which, again, to remind those who don't know what they are, it's gracious God. Actually, it's 15 words. Gracious God, today, is there someone you want me to connect with outside the church? And, if we could pray that prayer or say those words at the beginning of the day and then relax. Absolutely relax. Either God is going to connect us with someone or God isn't. So we can just relax, go about our normal day. But I challenge those who are listening, I challenge you to do that. Paste it to the inside of your eyelids, those 15 words. Get it on your mirror. Find a way to get it in front of your eyes. And I challenge you to do it because what those who have done it come back and report is that God seems to turn up in the most ordinary, everyday places. And so the first part of the equipping is just to ask God to open up those opportunities. The second part of the equipping is once we actually have a name that comes to mind, or when somebody comes in our pathway, we could be shopping or out on a daily walk and somebody comes walking towards us, and then we simply try and get the 3 words out of our mouth, that the how are you? And of course, we all recognize, because we're in a society that we're in, the answer's going to be fine. And then get the 4th word out, which is, no, how are you really? How are you really? So if you ask me, Lawrence, how can we equip people? Frankly, it's 15 words and 4 words. And then listen in silence. Listening and silence are the 2 superpowers. They don't cost anything either. But actually, the more we do of it, the better we will become at it.
That's a relief, isn't it? That the 2 superpowers are listening in silence, because it's a relief. If you ask people to engage in a conversation, it then becomes, but what if I can't say the right things? Whereas, ask the question, shut up and listen.
Yeah.
That's such a relief.
It is. And, invariably, of course, what happens, because we're listening to the other person, very often another question is downloaded into our minds. Because that's what, when you listen, you seek a little bit more information to kind of understand more of what the person is actually saying. But but there's no training that really can prepare us for what that second question is going to be.
Yeah.
The thing we have to rely on is the superpowers, which are free absolutely free, listening and silence. But what gets downloaded in that is probably another question, which helps the other person tell a little bit more of their story.
Power of how are you? Thank you very much, Michael.
My pleasure.
Is there anything else that we need to do?
I think that's great. No, I think that's great. And clearly